Chirnan, as you know, I was unable to send you my slides in PowerPoint because of some of the pictures. It was too big, so I sent them PDF. Is that going to work out for you? Chirnan? Okay.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Yes, yes. So it's fine. We've already used the slides you've given us. We'll put that up.
No problem.
I think it's going to be not going to be a problem. So we're about to go live. So if everybody could just quiet and put on their screens, mute their speakers, we're about to go live right now. Please. Thank you. Doing what you. I don't know. Am I on video? Show me on video. Yes.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is Matthew. Can you hear me?
Yes, afternoon, Mr. Matthew. We're glad to have you here. Thank you very much for being able to get in touch with us. We're about going live, so we're a bit behind schedule. So if you can just mute your mic, we'll get back to you. I'll let you know when you're coming on, sir. Thank you very much. Okay. So, good afternoon to our participants in West and Central Africa, and good day to our audience across the globe. On behalf of ACIOE Associates, the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, and the Nigerian Strategy Support Program of the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI-NSSP, we would like to welcome you to the second part of our agricultural webinar series with the theme, Recovery Efforts to Mitigate Agricultural Supply Chain Challenges. This session will focus on the role of agricultural development programs. But before further proceedings, let us briefly introduce our services and our joint organizers who have made this epoch event possible. ACIOE Associates is an advisory services firm providing solutions in strategy, government relations, regulatory affairs, economic development, advocacy, investment facilitation, and policy analysis. Our team provides advisory services on critical sectors, including health, agriculture, social impact, and government relations. We have supported governments at federal and subnational levels, development partners, and organizations around sustainable solutions to the challenging economic, political, and developmental issues in the countries we operate. As part of our diverse portfolio in the agricultural sector, we have helped a global nonprofit to assess policy blockages and develop recommendations in the tomato and cassava value chains in Nigeria. We have supported a global development company to identify constraints impacting doing business in the agricultural space in Nigeria, just to mention a few. As part of our initiatives to assuage agricultural sector challenges, we are actively providing regular updates for existing clients on the COVID-19 impacts and recovery efforts on specific agricultural programs at the federal and subnational levels. We have taken the fore in providing thought leadership on COVID-19 pandemic impacts by preferring recovery steps in the agricultural space with our Beyond COVID-19 series, which highlights homegrown innovations that can be adopted to scale to improve food security and resilience in Nigeria. The reports have been published to much acclaim. The second part of the series on urban farming can now be downloaded on our website, www.acioe.com. And of course, we are facilitating webinars such as this on the key lessons and recovery efforts considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the first part of our cultural webinar series, which held on the 11th of June 2020 with the theme, Agricultural Supply Chain Situational Analysis and Post-Pandemic Recovery Plans, National Preparedness and the Role of the Private Sector. The panelists provided high-level insights into the measures and strategies adopted by their respective institutions to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on agricultural supply chains, as well as recovery efforts to ensure resilience to further shocks in the sector. You can visit our website to have a full video of this recording. The USAID, so let's quickly introduce our partners, as we said. The USAID funded Feed the Future Nigeria Agricultural Policy Project. It's implemented by the Michigan State University and the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI's Nigeria Strategy Support Program. It is designed to address the need for policy research and capacity building, and to ensure that Nigerian institutions are equipped to respond effectively and promptly to the increasing capacity, knowledge, and information needs of the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. As part of the state ministries as well as the state ministries of Agriculture and Natural Resources. IFPRI-NSSP works closely with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development to strengthen evidence-based policy making in Nigeria in the areas of rural and agricultural development. It is becoming increasingly clear that the lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic has raised major concerns around the food supply chain and commodity trades across Nigeria. These shocks may have gross economic implications for the growth of agriculture-based development projects. Anticipated impacts include massive post-harvest losses, increase in the cost of food commodities, challenges with access to nutritious foods, and general food security concerns, as well as threats to the agricultural sector's contribution to the nation's GDP. We have assembled a distinguished panel of industry leaders to give us high-level insights and recovery plans for agricultural development programs. The panel discussion will focus on harnessing and scaling up opportunities on post-pandemic recovery efforts. The objectives of the panel discussion include to present facts on the potential impact on developmental projects due to COVID-19 pandemic, to share insights on post-pandemic development plans from international development programs perspective, which includes investment, trade, value chain, logistics support, and agricultural finance, and to highlight opportunities and initiatives that promote resilience and sustainability across agricultural supply chains. Details of the timelines, order of activities, and the distinguished panelists are shared on the screen as we speak. There will be a periodic poll question on the screen during the webinar. We encourage participants to kindly answer the questions to help us improve the quality and impact of this and subsequent webinars. We trust that at the end of the webinar, you will all leave more informed about the high-level recovery efforts and cross-sectorial skill adaptations of development programs across the agricultural landscape in Nigeria. I will now hand you over to our partners at the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce to set the tone and usher in our panelists. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Chirnan, for that great introduction to this all-encompassing agri-based webinar that we're having today. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Matthew Bogbame. I'm the chairman of the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, Kaduna, representing the Northern region. By way of a small intro about the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, I just want to quickly tell us that the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, NACC, is the first and the oldest bilateral chamber of commerce in Nigeria, having been inaugurated in 1960 in Lagos. NACC has grown into a dynamic organization. It stands as a pillar of the relationship between the US and Nigeria, serving as an important catalyst in bringing together people and ideals to bolster bilateral commercial relations between Nigeria and the United States. NACC has close to 1,000 members across the country, spanning different sectors of the economy, in having 8 chapters as well, and also a chapter in Houston. Another one is coming up in Dallas. We have over 300 members in the Northern region with marked investment in the agricultural sector across various value chains, such as poultry, yams, just to mention a few. Our members, like other major cross-sectoral players, have raised major concerns about supply chain disruptions, which has led to some businesses looking into neighboring countries to assuage supply chain limitations. An example is one of our members who is a key stakeholder in the poultry industry. He has been forced to take eggs to Niger Republic due to supply-oriented market limitations. This poultry has about 70 or I think 80,000 beds now, and they're producing eggs like, like there's no tomorrow. And they have been a major supplier of eggs to the feeding program in Kaduna State, and all that has stopped. And then there's a glut. Like I mentioned before, we try to impress on him to look at egg poultry, which they can, egg yolk, which they can supply to companies that are making biscuits and chocolates and all that. He's looking at that, but to mitigate immediate supply disruptions, they're having to look at Niger and other areas where they can, supply their eggs. As an example, he has been forced to take his eggs to Niger Republic due to supply-oriented market limitations. Some of our members in the already stretched northeastern region have seen the supply chain challenges exacerbated by pandemic restrictions. Another challenge faced by members even before the pandemic and its effects was the high rate of post-harvest losses, as evident by research carried out by my humble self into the yam value chain, which showed that while domestic consumption is at about 2 to 3 million tubers per annum, a large portion of production is lost to post-harvest variables, especially from the Benue State axis. In the light of these and other challenges faced by our ever industrious members, NSSP has collaborated with ACIOE Associates and IFPRI to bring about the webinar series to highlight recovery and resilience efforts that can be adopted to negate the challenges faced by agribusiness investors in Nigeria. It's my honor, therefore, to introduce our panelists for this second webinar to discuss the role of agricultural development programs in mitigating supply chain challenges. On the panel, we have, like Chirnan had mentioned before, we have Dr. Adam Stafford. He's the Managing Director and Chief of Party, Feed the Future Nigeria Agribusiness Investment Activity. I think he's joining us from Boston. We also have Mr. Michael Clements, Chief of Party, USAID West Africa Trade and Investment Activity. We have Mrs. Anna Venumbres, my friend. She's the head of Project EU GIZ Nigeria Competitiveness Program, European Union. And lastly, we have Mr. Deji Balogun, the CEO of Afex Commodities and Exchange Limited. I must say we also have our able moderator, Ms. Yewande Kazim, the CEO, founder, Wendeville Media, who will be anchoring the event from now. I would like to thank all our panelists for taking our time to be part of this webinar. We look forward to an insightful session. While I now hand you over to Dr. Adam Kwao of the International Food and Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, to give us a presentation on priorities for agricultural development projects. With this, I want to thank all the panelists, and I hope and look forward to a very robust engagement this afternoon, and where we think and hope that we will get insights into the situations that are facing us real time in terms of disruptions in the agricultural space. Thank you very much. Dr. Andam.
Thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon to everyone on the panel and in the audience. We are glad that everyone could make it for this webinar. For us at IFPRI, as implementers of the USAID-funded Feed the Future Nigeria Agricultural Policy Project, we are very pleased to be part of this seminar series. And following on from the success of the previous one, I want to congratulate ACIOE for taking the lead in the organization. So I see this very, very much as a continuation of the discussion that was started in the previous webinar. Having set the tone by looking at the challenges for the agricultural supply chain and having heard about the policy responses from the distinguished participants that you saw on your screen a moment ago, I think it's right that we now turn to the role that agricultural development programs can play in the recovery. So what I see here, I don't know if you are seeing situational analysis. That's what I'm seeing here on the screen. That was actually, I guess that reminds us of some of the insights I shared in the previous webinar about our assessment of the impacts of COVID-19 in Nigeria. And in that presentation, I generally made the point that the findings show that the pandemic and the policy responses have adversely affected agricultural supply systems, both from the input and the output sides. And some of these are unintended policy consequences, right? Especially the indirect channels that we see. So today, actually, my topic is not a situational analysis. It is, as Matthew mentioned, priorities for agricultural development programs. So that's a really broad topic, and I won't pretend to address it in a few minutes. I think we are all looking forward to hearing from our panelists and the various perspectives that they bring. However, what I would like to do is to quickly point to two findings from our ongoing analysis. First, we have looked at priorities for agricultural development in Nigeria from a combination of social accounting matrix modeling and what we call the Rural Investment and Policy Analysis, or IAPA. And combining those two models, we are able to look at the impacts that various value chains have on different outcomes. And the finding from that work is that no one value chain is most effective at achieving all outcomes, such as reducing poverty, recovering economic growth, regenerating jobs, and improving nutrition. These are all goals that policymakers are looking to and that agricultural development programs would like to contribute to. So for example, if we think about poverty reduction, a product like pulses makes a huge impact. But if we are thinking about jobs, then we should be looking towards cash crops. So it's important, I think, to point to these results for us to think about prioritization when we develop and implement agricultural development programs. The second point is just to mention that before COVID-19, Nigeria was already facing the triple burden of malnutrition, right? Childhood undernutrition, lack of micronutrients such as iron causing anemia, and overweight and obesity, especially in urban areas. And the underlying cause of this, from research that we have done, is the poor dietary quality, which is a universal problem in Nigeria, driven mainly by increased consumption of non-staple calories. And this cuts across income groups and urban, rural, and different seasons in the year. The reason why I mention this is that COVID-19 will worsen the problems with nutrition and dietary quality. And so it's really important for agricultural development programs to be nutrition sensitive, going beyond primary agriculture to support other aspects of the agri-food system with a nutrition sensitive approach in mind. So with that, I'm going to end and hand over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kwam. Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Yewande Kazim. I'm the founder of Wandeville Media. And we are a media communication PR agency that focuses strictly on agriculture. On the panelists, we missed somebody. We missed Dr. Abubakar Suleiman, is the National Program Officer at FAO. He'll be joining us today. So to get started, we would have Dr. Adam Safa give a 5 minutes talk on the topic on how the industry insights, recovery efforts, and how we're adapting post COVID-19. Dr. Safa, are you with me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Yewande. I've got 300 seconds. I'm glad you reminded me of that, but I might get another 100 seconds or so from Kwao. Good morning, everybody. I hope this finds everybody healthy and in good spirits and good shape and good health. There's not enough time to do justice to this topic, so I'm just going to speak from the perspective of our project. As Kwao said, there's a lot of dimensions to this, and I'll be speaking about our project. Next slide. Very briefly, I'm going to be going quite quickly. We're a 5-year project funded by USAID Feed the Future. We're part of a portfolio of projects, each one targeting a certain aspect of food security, of nutritional security, of improving the investment climate. Our main role is to look at improving the competitiveness and capacity of the agribusiness sector. Next slide. And we are looking at mandated 5 value chains. This is part of the contract agreement with USAID: maize, rice, soybean, cowpea, and aquaculture. Next slide. And in 7 specific states. Next slide. Yes, Benue, Cross River, Delta, Ebonyi, and Kaduna, Kebbi, in Niger State. Just for you to know that USAID also has 4 additional projects focused on the Northeast within the portfolio. This slide is basically the project in a nutshell. We deal with 3 primary target audiences: agribusinesses ranging from producers to off-takers, processors, aggregators, etc., finance and investment institutions, commercial banks, microfinance banks, government banks, etc., and agricultural policy. This component is focused on state and federal government trying to create a more conducive and inclusive enabling environment for agribusiness. We have a strong focus on women and youth, which of course, given the statistics and the demographics, are going to be key to Nigeria's success, especially when in 2050, it's going to be the 3rd largest country in the world, and 70% of the people will be under 35. Next slide. So what I've done here is I've just quickly talked about a few of the challenges in the 3 areas in government, and this is not new to most of you. You know, there's a lot of effort being put on developing policies, but from our perspective, the real weakness is in terms of implementation, capacity, budgeting, sensitization, reinforcement, monitoring, evaluation, learning, adaptation, etc. But there's also issues between federal and state, communication, cooperation, and collaboration issues within ministries, within state governments, and the policy development and approval process, which not only needs more input from stakeholders, but also from citizens. The citizens' voice is very important. They're often left out. Next slide. In terms of financial institutions, agriculture is risky. And agriculture deals are often smaller than other deals. So basically, financial institutions are not thrilled with it. When you look at how the ag desks were created and initially mandated that banks have ag desks, you know, you have a lack of understanding in agriculture and agribusiness, how to mitigate risk, how to conduct your due diligence for investment firms. The Securities Transactions and Movable Assets Act, which is pretty much movable collateral, is not being utilized to its extent. And there's the history of poor repayment. There's a lot of reasons why banks shy away from this. And there's a bit of a confused market. You know, you've got government intervention funds here and there and commercial guarantees and MFIs. And it's hard for the borrowers to really get a grip, especially the rural borrowers who often are not financially literate or speak English. COVID-19 has exacerbated this, although it existed before, in that banks are really now looking at refocusing their portfolios. In agribusiness, you've got one of the biggest things, of course, is access to land, access to money, traditional agricultural practices versus gap. So you have high loss rates, you have poor yields, and you know, entrepreneurs are fiercely independent, and so you don't see a whole lot of large co-ops as you do in other parts of Africa. Access to finance, inputs, markets, training, etc. And in post-harvest, same thing applies, but we're really looking at the relationship between producers and off-takers and how to make that more sustainable and longer term and more predictable. Next slide. In terms of what we are doing, we're working with the main thing we're doing, or the most important thing, not main, is working with IFPRI on what's called the Nigeria Agriculture Technology Improvement Plan. That's the replacement for the APP. There's a committee. There's a 4-day meeting starting today on that we're part of. We're working on the Movable Collateral Act. We're working on MSME policy and working with Ministry of Women's Affairs. At the state level, we're looking at a lot of agricultural policy and trying to facilitate as many public-private sector dialogues as interaction as possible to get as much input into the decision-making process. In terms of banks, we're working with banks on helping them understand agriculture and value chain lending. We're working with the industry associations, Rifan, MAN, and CAFAN, etc., and helping them release loans from mainly the government intervention loans, AgSmiths, ABP, CACs. And we are shortly to produce a compendium of these various government intervention funds and grant sources. That'll be out within the next couple of months, and also a compendium of guidelines for SMEs looking for investment. That will be also made public soon. In the agribusiness side, we're training agribusinesses in GAP. We're supporting producer organizations. We're trying to get women and youth more and more engaged. We're holding webinars and business clinics and looking at technology, as technology is a very key aspect in not only more productive agriculture, but attracting youth into agriculture, which is not seen as the most exciting career path. To date, we've done about $20 million in finance investment. Our goal is $300 million, and we have about $100 million in the pipeline. And I really appreciate everybody's attention. This slide deck, I assume, will be made available to everybody after the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Safar. Thank you. So I wanted to also add that if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. Do not put it in the chat box, just put it in the Q&A box. Next, we have Mr. Michael Clemens. Mr. Clemens, are you with me?
Good afternoon. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to all my fellow panelists and to all the attendees. It's great to be meeting with you today, and thank you for joining us. In my 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the structure of the Trade Hub and talk to you about what our primary objectives are, and then talk more specifically about what our COVID-19 responses look like. So for those of you who don't know, this version of the West Africa Trade and Investment Hub was launched in early September last year. But the first 2 months was all about setup, and we really started operating or building our pipeline in November. And the way the fund works is we've actually, you can think of us as a social and economic impact investment fund, in that we've got $60 million to award across the region as grants to attract private sector investment alongside our grants, and I'll talk more about that, with a view to establishing what we call catalytic business concepts. And in Nigeria, but not in other countries, we also offer a grant for R&D. So of the $60 million, if we talk specifically about Nigeria, $27 million of the 60 is for Nigeria, and of that 27, 16.2 million is to be awarded for catalytic business concept applications, and 10.8 million is to be awarded for R&D applications. So the sort of R&D applications that we're looking for are specifically to do with innovations in technology, modernization of agricultural practices, things like that. The idea behind the R&D grants is that they will turn into some sort of revenue generating asset, whether it's the creation of IP or similar, during the life of the Trade Hub. So we are a 5-year program. We've got a significant interest in establishing as many grants as we can during that period and delivering as many new ideas into practice as we can. So to give you an idea of the size of the grants, firstly, let me say that we issue a grant per idea or per concept, as we call it, not per company, which means a company can apply for multiple grants, each one for a different idea. The grant size varies between $250,000 and $2 million for catalytic business concepts, and between $200,000 and $500,000 for R&D. The objectives that we've been set by USAID are that our $60 million investment fund needs to attract a further $300 million in private sector investment. So roughly a ratio of 5 to 1, but that does not mean that every deal needs to be done at a 5 to 1 leverage ratio. We have to achieve 5 to 1 over the life of the project and on average across our portfolio. So depending on the attractiveness of the deal, we might consider a deal at 1 to 1. It can't be worse than 1 to 1. But over the entire portfolio, we're looking for a 5-to-1 leverage ratio, and we'll attract $300 million. Very similar to Dr. Safa's objective of 300 million as well. Our second objective is to create 40,000 new jobs, and 20,000 of those, at least 20,000 of those, will be jobs for women. And our third objective is to stimulate an increase of $240 million in export revenues. To give you an idea of our scope of operation, we are currently engaged in discussions about investments in 8 different countries in West Africa, but we do have the mandate to operate or invest in any of the West African countries, depending on whether, on a deal-by-deal basis, they will add to the 3 major objectives that I've outlined. What then happened is COVID-19 came along, and so on the 13th of May, we introduced a third grant type specifically for COVID-19. So our immediate response is that, first of all, the application process for a COVID-19 grant is greatly simplified. We still need to ensure that our investment is attracting the sorts of co-investments that I've been talking about, but our objectives for COVID-19 grants are slightly different in that they are aimed very specifically at overcoming disruptions in export-oriented supply chains, or to support domestic food security initiatives. And as opposed to creating new jobs, our COVID-19 grant is aimed at the prevention of job losses. So we've introduced this grant type really with an eye on trying to create stability and assist with the recovery, as opposed to our other grant types, which are all about expansion and growth. Obviously, the first thing to do is steady the ship, and we're hoping that our COVID-19 grants will do that. As at this morning, we've got 220 companies who've applied for a COVID-19 grant by registering in our system, and about 30 have submitted their full applications. The COVID-19 grant closes on the 30th of June, and we're expecting quite a deluge of applications between now and then. Just in terms of insights, let me say that our program, mainly because it's still in its infancy, has not really experienced any slowdown in people registering in our system or producing their concept notes or engaging with us on advice of how to do their full-blown proposals and so on. There's been no slowdown of that. Adam Safa made a statement in one of his slides that loans have slowed, and that certainly replicates our experience, but it's not the demand for loans that slowed, it's the supply for loans that slowed. And I think that is actually what Adam said, and we're finding the same thing. We did a survey of our pipeline of about 250 companies, and we asked them a number of COVID-19 related issues. And one of the major outputs of that was that 73% of our respondents said that they were not contemplating any changes to their overall investment strategies, except the timing of these investments, the timing of the implementation projects might change. But there's certainly, from what we have seen, no diminution in the desire to invest, either in a stabilization project through our COVID-19 grant or an expansion project through our other grants. The other point I'll just finish with is that in terms of, again, one of our responses specifically to COVID-19 is in our catalytic business concept grant, it works on a milestone-driven reimbursable basis, meaning that the grantee needs to go out and do the work that achieves a certain milestone, and then after the event, and incur all the costs for doing that, and then after the event, claim from us our share of what we undertook to pay for each milestone. We're doing it differently with COVID-19 because a significant issue is obviously access to finance, and because our grant size for COVID-19 is aimed more specifically at SMEs, we will be awarding money, making grant payments in advance of milestones being achieved to produce the funding and the cash flow that a milestone actually needs. So on a milestone by milestone basis, we'll give people an advance that will get them through that milestone. And hopefully if all of that goes well, then we'll approach milestone 2 on a similar basis. But the grant will be distributed up front. In a nutshell, that is what the Trade Hub is all about. Thank you very much for your attention. It's great to be with you, and I'm happy to answer any questions in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clarence. Thank you. You guys have been very proactive with the COVID-19 response. So the next person will be Mr. Ayodeji Balogun from AFEX. Hello?
Hi, Yewande. Thank you very much. Great to be here. So AFEX is a licensed commodities exchange in Nigeria. We operate across 13 states in the country, and I work with over 110,000 farmers and growing across 600 communities. In essence, our role is to enhance the liquidity within the agricultural sector, meaning ensuring that producers can get financing to produce optimally, but also processors can also get financing to be able to aggregate the product, but buy it in a very efficient, transparent manner where value is equally shared across the processors. You know, in terms of the way we look at, you know, the COVID situation and what that is setting aside. So we think that recovery, you know, it's to the next slide. So it's really started with affecting the logistics component of the whole chain, sort of distorting both supply and demand has been mentioned, but and that has very strong bearing across the several elements of the entire value chain. What we see a lot more today is a situation where it's very difficult to get fertilizer, and that is really affecting production as we speak. You know, and that has huge potentials both on the economy, the livelihoods of smallholder farmer, but also our food stability as we set into Q4, Q1 next year. And we started to see some of those volatilities affect prices currently. More broadly, in terms of what we've done as a business to address this is we're currently providing financing to 50,000 farmers across several value chains. And that's about $7.5 million in debts to smallholder farmers. On the other side, between now and the end of the year, we're also going to be helping processors unlock about $30 million in financing to be able to aggregate the products. All this in structured commodity financing, different products through the exchange. We work very closely with everybody on the room. Adam, Clements, we're part of your clients in the pipeline. Anna has been extremely supportive in many ways. AGRA is one of an ally, and AGRA is also partly funded by USAID Food the Future. And then we're also part of a number of recovery efforts planned by governments, both at state and federal level, in terms of how to intervene and ensure that food production is significantly increased and the country can manage, the coming quarters and the likely recession that will come with it. More broadly, in terms of a more holistic approach, the slide showing now shows several elements of the value chain that is being affected. Final access to credits, even more importantly by smallholder farmer now, poor infrastructure. We've had huge problems around moving products from the south where fertilizer is produced to go across the country, port congestions, those are just moving products. So we spend about 15% of the cost of commodities on just transportation, as compared with about 5 to 6%, which is the global average. Market access is farmers continue to live in a vicious cycle because of poor market access. And this is, partly because they're just not financially included. So they have to then sell to people that then take advantage of them. In terms of how we need to have an holistic, solution to this as an economy, we see two broad areas. For partners, which they are for convening this sector that brings in both the development and the private businesses together to think through recovery. I think there has to be very strong alignment between public, donor, and private capital. I think the private players come with that innovation and that capacity to implement and deploy faster than both government and donors. And that alignment helps everybody to get things. The donors come with capital that can de-risk private capital and allow them to still manage the weather through the storm. So that co-creation and collaboration will be very, very essential as we recover and build resilience in the food value chains. The second core part of how we need to then focus more operational level is in what we at FX think is an alignment of three things that have to happen simultaneously. So we need to increase the talent in agriculture and ensure that, right from the producers, we're able to get more human capacity, from getting the smallholder farmers a lot more knowledgeable to also bring in a lot more larger farmers, commercial farms into the space. The second part of it is we need to deploy capital for both the demand and the supply side simultaneously. And then the third is we need to enhance productivity, which is something that we've all talked about. Now, the difference in our opinion is that a lot of instances, projects address one of these three individually. So it's either you're unlocking financing, or you're focused on training farmers, or you're focused on unlocking, increasing productivity. In our view, they have to be simultaneously orchestrated to give us meaningful change. Those are some of our thoughts, and then what we are also doing in the space as a business, as FX Commodities Exchange. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ideji. Thank you. So next, we have a poll session going up during the session, the survey questions. Please don't forget to fill it out. Continue to fill it out. We appreciate the response. Next, we have Mrs. Anna. Are you with me?
Yeah, good afternoon, Yewande, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having NICOP here. So I will start my presentation just doing a very brief introduction of what the Nigerian Competitiveness Program is trying to achieve in Nigeria. We are an European Union and BMZ, that's the German cooperation funded program. We are supposed to be working for 4 years in Nigeria, supporting the agricultural value chains and light manufacturing value chains. These are tomato and chili, ginger, leather, and garment. And we have a strong approach on inclusivity and innovation. And we have 3 pillars of support that we provide to all the different actors across the different stages in the value chain. The first one is a technical one that supports on entrepreneurship, productivity, and market linkages. The second one is a policy pillar that actually looks at all the policies and regulations that somehow constrain the business enabling environment for these value chains, and we advocate for change. And the third one is the access to finance and investment. And what we are trying to do here is to ensure that from the supply side, the source of the money, all the financial institutions and different sources of funding understand the competitive and comparative advantages of our value chains. They also understand the needs and constraints of each of the actors across each stage of the value chain. And we help them design financial products that meet the threshold on profitability and risk. And then we do the facilitation, the networking, and the matchmaking. We have gender mainstream across all interventions, and clearly, because we have 4 value chains, 8 different states in Nigeria, we are leveraging strongly on collaborations and partnerships across all the different levels. In the next slide, I'm not gonna go in deep detail of all the different activities that we are doing beyond COVID. This presentation is very focused on COVID-19. And what we've actually done is that we've really switched priorities from long-term development objectives to immediate food crisis and emergency response. And especially we started thinking from day one of the pandemic on the medium-term recovery efforts. We started, we didn't start, this is something that we've actually done, but we really emphasize the direct support to the smallholder farmers through intermediaries and inclusive business to ensure that we were able to reach more strongly to these smallholder farmers. We realigned priorities to ensure that basic food production and the value chains flow continued. We readjust budget lines to offer a better response. So for example, we have local subsidies that are similar to grants in our budget. So we started doing direct procurement so that the farmers can process the produce close to their farms. So the post-harvest loss due to logistic issues wouldn't be as high. And we've really switched all our training and capacity building from offline to doing directly with the farmers to more online measures through SMS, through radio programs with different platforms that we've been using. In the next slide, we'll showcase how all these different activities were not done in isolation. What we actually did, we conducted a survey with our major partners to understand what were the challenges and constraints and what was the big problems that COVID was meaning to their own business. This helped us understand the issues and the gaps, and we developed specific plans to address these specific gaps that COVID-19 had brought. We changed implementation timelines and approaches for some activities, and we divided our line of action in 3 different categories. The first one that we'll see on the next slide is a short-term measures that we actually try to do, focusing on reducing the interactions with the farmers, making sure that all the trainings didn't have more than 20 people. We ensured that we were keeping all the necessary physical distance. We provided face masks, soap, and hydroalcohol to prevent the transmission of COVID. We also leverage on aggregators and processors to be able to reach to partners, and we ensure that we ensure collaboration between the garment value chain to produce face masks that we were providing to all these farmers. We had in the short term some specific and critical measures around the immediate liquidity issues. So we actually supported our MSMEs to access the Central Bank of Nigeria COVID-19 targeted facility, and up to today, 100% of all of the proposals that we submitted have been approved by the National Microfinance Bank for disbursement. We've also explored fintech and other different solutions to ensure that credit and money was flowing to our value chains. We also concentrated on the access to raw inputs, as some of the value chains like ginger were put in the middle of the planting season. So we try to support farmers and aggregators to access different inputs. And we also emphasize on the training of compost to be an alternative to the use of fertilizer. We also supported our value chain actors on the access to markets. So we actually provided this equipment so that they could produce closer to the farm and add more value to the produce that they were producing. We encouraged the market linkages, and we ensured that all the flow of transport was done in a transparent way to avoid profiteering. In the medium term, we had different areas of support, financial, policy, and technical. On the financial one, we actually contributed to the setting up of the COVID-19 Impact Consortium that is going to be launched on the 8th of July. And this is bringing together organizations like the Impact Investor Foundation, like the African Venture Capital Philanthropy Alliance, the Ford Foundation, and NICOP and IBAN GIZ programs to set up an online platform that will coordinate all the response from donors and philanthropy to support inclusive business. We are also going to set up an emergency relief fund for inclusive business. We also supported the creation of an impact investment relief facility to provide cash to impact business. And we've been exploring more flexible and more responsible sources of finance that can better address the particular needs that our value chains have at this moment. At policy level, we've actually mapped the states and federal response to COVID-19 to ensure that the economic impact is correctly assessed. There are adequate national and state policy frameworks that are going to answer to the specific needs of the impact of COVID-19. We've also encouraged public-private sector engagement, and we've tried to make sure that the states are learning between each other, and there are strong linkages between the federal and the state responses, because in some cases there seems to be a disconnect. At the technical level, we've shifted the local subsidies to direct procurement of processing machinery to enable our farmers to add value closer to the farm. And we are looking at the medium-term support towards getting equipment to produce professional PPEs that are gonna help the expansion of this pandemic. In the long term, again, we are focusing very much on collaborations and partnerships. We are engaging with the state governments. We are actively participating in donor coordination groups like the agriculture, like the private sector development, like the trade coordination group. And we are ensuring that we are coordinating all this group to have a coordinated response to the challenges that we are having. As I mentioned as well, the COVID-19 Impact Consortium is going to be aggregating all these response, and we are exploring additional collaborations with private and public sector partners. In the next slide, we are going to see a few insights on how some of these challenges that the COVID-19 have brought to us actually represent opportunities to promote resilience and sustainability. Anna, yes?
Excuse me, Ms. Anna, 1 minute. Sorry, we can just wrap up. If we can just wrap up in 1 minute.
Yeah, I'll wrap up in 1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
So all these challenges translate into strong opportunities. So for example, what we mentioned on the more flexible and responsible sources of investment, is clear that they seem to be better suited for the situation on the ground. In the value chain integration, clearly activities like growth formation, contract farming and market linkages, introduction of innovation and technology, local production for farm inputs to avoid the disruption of the imports, the standard reinforcement for import substitution are clearly great opportunities that have been brought. And then around logistics, this is something that sometimes the value chain programs are not focusing so strongly, but keeping the trade flowing is essential. So exploring logistic partnerships, developing the cold chain, and introducing technology and innovation across the logistics aspect of the value chain are very important for the sustainability and the resilience in the agricultural value chains. There were also some interesting insights on the agricultural finance, exploring all these innovative sources of finance, but maybe we leave that for the Q&A. Thank you, Yewande.
Thank you very much. So we're running out of time. So for the last one, we have Dr. Abubakar Suleiman. Dr. Abubakar, are you with me? Dr. Abubakar? Okay, we'll just go ahead. We'll just go ahead with the questions. Please continue to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And we'll just ask a couple of questions. And so for Dr. Safa, so as you mentioned, CNFA has worked with a lot of state governments, banks and associations. So how are you advising the stakeholders to build resilience and help build better? But most importantly, as the pandemic impacted investment in development programs in Nigeria?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Yewande. Well, you know, we're trying to improve the communication between all parties so they better understand the challenges. You know, a lot of the things I spoke about existed before COVID and will exist after COVID. So COVID has exacerbated a lot of things, but generally flowing down from the inconsistent policies in the federal and state level down to the private sector, the divisions of who's responsible for what and how to collaborate is not clear. So with the banks, you know, it's a lot of training to show them that investing in making loans in agriculture can be profitable. That's what their motivation is, and how to do that safely, and how to bring in guarantees and other things to help mitigate the risks. For the agribusinesses, a lot of it is awareness, you know, that they don't even know where to go to get such things, or they go to one bank, they get turned down, and then they assume that no bank will speak to them and just give up. I think in the main, it's behavioral change. And that's the hardest thing to do in international development. And it's getting people to realize that agriculture is a business. It's a commercial, viable career path for women and youth, and trying to demonstrate that. A lot of our training is basic business training or gap training. And people are willing and ready, but it really has to be emphasized and supported by all of the stakeholders, including the state government getting certificates of occupancy, banks having them be very clear in what their requirements are, and government intervention funds getting the input loans, getting ABP to issue the loans, the inputs at the right time, not after planting season, or the right inputs, the right fertilizer. So there's a lot of behavioral change required to upgrade and make the sector competitive and sustainable and resilient. And we're just, we're a small project. We're one donor project. That's not going to change the world, but we are trying to demonstrate by proving the concept with our partners. So we've got MOUs with about 130 plus partners to show that agribusiness can be profitable and sustainable, including what Kwao started with, both in terms of food security and nutritional security and job creation and improved profitability.
Thank you very much, Dr. Safa. So Mr. Michael Clement, I wanted to talk to you. A lot of people, you talked about the COVID-19 response fund that you had available, and I know it closed yesterday, but a lot of people here want to know how they can access this fund. Could you clarify on how they can access this fund, even though the COVID-19 has closed, but you also have the main West African, the trade fund available, sorry. How accessible is it? How can people access it?
Thank you for the question. The fund did not close yesterday. It was originally going to close yesterday, but we did advertise an extension, a very short extension, through to the 30th of September. So people who wish to apply have still got another 5 days to do so. The best way to do it is to visit our website, westafricatradehub.com, and you can download the application form there and submit it. You need to upload it into our grants management system, and that's a very straightforward process. But the fund is still open, and we would welcome applications up to the 30th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that as well. So Mr. Ayodeji, I wanted to know how the pandemic has impacted community exchange, but you mentioned that one of your major challenges was logistics, and I think that was for everybody initially. But you also mentioned that that has affected food prices. What can we look forward to in terms of how does it affect food commodity, but how does it affect prices in the future?
So I wish I had good news for that answer, but the answer is really bad, honestly speaking. In the last sort of like 5 weeks, average commodity prices had moved up between 30 best case scenario to up to 50%. Very huge spike. It's sort of correcting this week, but we'll see how the trends are. And bearing in mind that this is sort of the last, band of supply, and typically around this time is when prices dip, when farmers are selling products to get fertilizer, and then we are having this surge in price. It just tells us that we are getting dry on supply. Our neighboring countries have a stronger currency, and also they have a better bargaining power to buy up our commodities despite the lockdown on the borders. The next harvest is coming likely December because of the delayed rains that will come up. And even that cultivation now, in our best estimates, is probably going to be short in total aggregate supply by up to 25%, which means that for the commercial part of agricultural trade, you're looking at about a 40% deficit because the farmers will eat what they need locally before they sell the remaining to the market. So it looks like for the next 4 to 5 quarters, we're going to see significant volatility. We'll start seeing some food importation, which would affect foreign exchange and other macro variables, and then throw the whole production, supply, demand, and dynamics into another swing for the next 2 years. So not very great, Yewande.
That's horrible, actually. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Adeji. Ms. Hannah, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that we've heard and advice have been given by other international organizations is for Africa to trade regionally within the continent. And especially what Mr. Adeji is saying right now, what are your advice in terms of your survey that you've taken? What advice do you give Nigeria in terms of trade locally? But also from your survey, what are your insights? What have you found to help build resilience and continue operations for the smallholder farmers?
Okay, so regarding the first part of the question, regarding the exports, definitely, even though persons movement was the one that was the biggest affected, the trade of goods has also been affected, and we've continued supporting our farmers and aggregators to ensure that standards and quality do not decrease, and this will not be an additional challenge for these exports. And we've tried to ensure that all the different value addition that they could provide was enabled at that time. There are many different interventions that we are doing for standards and certification. They are still continuing because we believe there is a lot of potential in that area. And then regarding the second part of the question on the survey that we conducted it through all the different agents in our value chain, from input suppliers, smallholder farmers, commercial farmers, aggregators, retailers, exporters. So the challenges that each of them are having are quite different, because, for example, if you ask a smallholder farmer, is what Adeji just mentioned. They're having the challenges to get the money, to buy the fertilizers, to buy the seeds and other inputs. But if you are talking to an off-taker, is having different challenges. Overall, we've actually grouped all these challenges into different categories, and we've developed responses on medium, short, and long-term areas, and we will be deploying all these different solutions in the coming weeks and months, depending also on the priority and on the urgency. Another thing that we do, because we don't work on isolation, is to look at what other donor partners are doing. So if, for example, the programs of Adam or Michael are already focusing on a particular area and we feel it is well supported, we actually look into other aspects that maybe they are not being looked into as closely by donor partners or by the government. So we are in the process of finalizing exactly, especially for the medium and long term, what the response is going to be, but it's going to be providing a broad range of responses, because the nature of the challenges is quite diverse.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anna. So we're taking questions for the panelists in the Q&A session box. So please just type in your answers, your questions into the box. And I have a question from Mr. Zumunta Disu. I'm not sure who this is directed to, but any other panelists can could answer it. Agri-tech, sorry, I think I missed it. Okay, the question went off. So sorry, I have a question from Mr. Mohammed Kagu. Decisions on lending policies are usually taken at top management levels in DMBs, banks. Are there deliberate efforts by stakeholders towards encouraging by ways of sensitization or advocacy at those levels? If yes, how effective is it?
I can at least add a little bit to this, and that's he's absolutely right. And we are working trying to work at the top levels of banks, commercial banks, microfinance banks, development banks. You know, when it was mandated that banks have ag desks, You know, it wasn't mandated that the people managing the ag desks know anything about agriculture. So I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that, you know, it was a first step toward the right direction, but it wasn't really followed up. So now you have questions about the skills and experience of the people manning the ag desks, and they make all the decisions. So any application coming from the field, coming from a state, typically in most banks goes to the head of the ag desk for adjudication, evaluation, etc. So the people in the field working with the agribusinesses aren't necessarily trained in how to do that, how to support them, how to solicit them. The same way the ag businesses, you know, really the government extension services are obviously very low. And so in the field, again, you have ag businesses that are having a very difficult time accessing training. So we do work at the CEO level, at the C-suite level in the banks. When we do in our training, usually other people are assigned to do that, but they're loan officers, they're heads of banks. You've got some certainly more active than others, but it really needs to be supported as well by a policy basis and commitment by the banks toward the women, youth, vulnerable populations, and agribusiness sector, which is not an easy transition in Nigeria or in the US or in Europe or anywhere. But your point is well taken, that has to come from the top.
Yewande, I would like to add to what Adam just mentioned. We are also doing a similar approach, but on top of that, what we are doing is we are trying to sensitize the financial institutions, whether it's commercial banks, microfinance banks, or also DFIs, to make sure they are aligned with inclusive business and with impact business. So in that regard, we are really highlighting the potentials of this inclusive business. And we are also supporting them to access pool of funds from impact investment that is gonna allow them to reach this business, this impact business, in a more profitable and affordable way. And by doing this, by joining them to these impact investors, we are also able to kind of not dictate, but kind of influence what are the lending policies regarding the interest rate, regarding the maturity, regarding the different conditions that will be affordable and appropriate enough for these inclusive and impact businesses. So this is something that we are also trying to encourage a lot, to get these financial institutions receiving impact investment that is gonna kind of influence the way they are gonna finance the agribusiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that helped Dr. Mohamed Kago answer his question. The next one is federal government and state policy interventions continue to be ineffective with confusion, further exacerbated by COVID lockdown with departments of it. So the question is, have any efforts been made to work with local governments and traditional rural systems that are arguably closer to the rural communities in terms of development programs? Instead of working with state governments, are there efforts made to work with local governments and traditional rulers?
I'll give a couple of points. Yes, absolutely. Your first point is spot on with my thinking anyway. That's this very challenging policy environment. It is confusing, not only in government, but in the private sector. But in the states where we work in 7 states. We're working with community groups. We're working with women-based, women-owned and led organizations like Women in Agribusiness, Women in Aquaculture. One of the best ways to reach out, we don't really work with individual smallholder farmers. Our goal is to raise $300 million, and you can't do that raising $200 loans. But one of the most effective ways to reach the smallholder farmer is through the off-takers, through companies like Deji and Afex, who are working with 50,000 growers. Same thing with Bob and Gona and others. And then you have the industry associations. You have Rifon, Kafan. Rifon reports 1 million members. 12 million members and 100,000 staff at the ward level, community level, district level, LGA level. And so the way we get to the smallholder farmers is through these lead firms. who provide the input loans and then are the off-takers, or with these associations with many, many members. Government's job is to set up the policy, and it should be, and a lot of that at the state level is land allocation, traditional ownership of land, women's rights to inheritance, things like that. But when you get down beyond that, it's the private sector. So we spend more of our time working with the individual producing groups and associations to find out really what they need and what we can do. It's a big challenge, but you're on the right track. It has to be done. And in terms of, another one of your questions, we are very interested in reaching out towards schools, churches, and other groups to get messages across because it's not easy for donors to play that role. And the only people who are really going to fix this are Nigerians themselves. So our job is to empower the Nigerians to reach sustainability. We can't do that through a 2, 3, 4, 5-year project. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just would like to add something additional to what Adam just mentioned. In NICOP also, we have a very inclusive policy advocacy approach on the policy pillar. So we always start the process from our farmers and artisans through the policy dialogue, and the engagement like this ensures full inclusion and the policy advocacy and reform process at the local level. So we include from local leaders, religious leaders, etc., etc. The PPD is also the public-private dialogue. Also, we make sure that we facilitate these platforms to ensure that we capture all these voices that normally are not heard. And we are very active also on the alternative dispute resolution that is also related to policy. And in this way, we provide access to an affordable and efficient system of commercial dispute resolutions for farmers who wouldn't have been able to afford or access the regular court processes. So we are trying to also, within our policy pillars, to make sure that this policy engagement includes the local level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ede, did you want to add to that and talk about how you work with local community members?
Thank you. So it's really, if you look at the way our communal structure, and mostly at the producer end of things, the strongest way to really reach them and have that binding force is, one, through their trust groups within them and improving the dynamics at the cooperative level. But second, and sometimes more importantly, is through the traditional rulers, because they're binding force. And because smallholder farmers and people at the base of the pyramid typically live around a cluster and an ecosystem, so they rely on that structure, and then they always sort of abide by that, the codes of that. So for instance, when we give out loans, we always get the village heads or the community heads to sign as a guarantor. When we recruit our extension officers also, we get them to recommend and endorse the people that we recruit. And that's helped us significantly over the last 5 years, with defaults, really in the 3-4% range.
Thank you very much. So I have a question from Mr. Rufus Idris. He mentioned that with the COVID-19 disruptions to the food system, a lot of companies that are tech-enabled, that had technology, suffered less. And how are organizations on the panel, the panelist organization, meaning people on the panelists, your organizations, how are you leveraging on technology to address supply chain challenges?
So I'll agree with that and then disagree with it at the same time, if I'm allowed, you and they.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So one part is data is going to be absolutely critical if we really want to make a massive change in agriculture. So for instance, as we speak, there is no data on how much food is available stored in circulation. Before we get anything, there's no forecast on our crop outlook. We started an annual commodity outlook in the country. And we're trying to work on a crop forecast to say, what is the harvest going to be ahead of time? In advanced markets, you have these things almost on a next week basis. The best sort of data we have today is almost on a, 2018, 2019, like 2 seasons back. And the only way we can get this kind of data at the size that we need for a country like Nigeria is embracing technology. So yes, I agree that technology-enabled businesses will be able to adapt faster and maybe leapfrog some of the challenges that will come, in the coming months. On the other side, agriculture is just massive and heavy operations in a way that, sometimes the impact of technology is exaggerated in some way. You still need people to move. You still need trucks to carry products. And you still need people to be able to go to farm and labor to be able to travel across geopolitical zones. And sometimes technology is indeed an enabler, but sometimes we sort of take it as one single silver bullet that solves all the problem. And I disagree in that realm.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adiji. Thank you. We have a question for Mr. Michael, but he had to leave, so sorry about that. And okay, that message is, I'll let sorry. The Nigerian Farmers Group and Cooperative Society, which has a registered farm organization, has been in existence for greater than 3 years, just received a CACS funding from Keystone Bank, expecting more from different institutions with the state government where it's domiciled, guaranteeing them. I feel at least you should check them out. I mean, okay, that's an advice, not a question, sorry. So we have Dr. Suleiman. Dr. Suleiman Abubakar, are you with me? From FAO?
Yes, please, I'm listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. So I wanted to give you your 5 minutes to talk about how FAO is supporting state governments and the African continent in helping mitigate the disruption post-COVID-19. So I'll let you speak.
Okay, good afternoon, and apologies sincerely for joining late. I think there is a clash between several meetings. So just to give you a background, in Nigeria, FAO has been supporting the government and the people of Nigeria for the last 40 to 50 years. But specifically for the current medium-term strategic planning for FAO, we are focusing on 5 major areas. Number 1, essentially to support the government and people of Nigeria to achieve food security and nutrition. And secondly, also to ensure sustainable management of natural resources. Thirdly, to build inclusive and gendered value chain and agribusinesses. And fourthly, to support in disaster risk management and disaster reduction strategies. So with regards to COVID-19, I should say FAO's first immediate reaction was to be able to ensure that the food supply chains are kept alive. This began with advocacy at the high level, talking about government level, to ensure that there is exemptions in the restrictions that are being imposed either at the state or at the federal level to allow food logistics to continue without disruptions. And you would perhaps have noticed even in the presidential address, there is specific declarations that agri-food businesses, producers, input suppliers, and logistics relating to food production and value addition are to be exempted. So this is partly played by the advocacy and the role played by FAO. Although we must say at this time around, it is very difficult to say what will be the exact quantity of the disruption or what will be the impact of the advocacy in minimizing the disruptions. However, there are still some impact, particularly in rural agrarian producer markets, where there is no high density human population. So the lockdown was not strictly enforced, and it allows some flexibility around movement of especially agro-perishables to reach markets. And secondly, we also made a lot of advocacy to sustain activities such as quality assurance that will minimize food safety risks and guarantee quality of the food that is being supplied through the markets. So this is the initial reaction of FAO. Then secondly, we've noticed as the crisis evolved, we realized that the vast majority of the responses are not evidence-based. There is very little information to target interventions for maximum impact. So FAO collaborated with other UN systems agencies, notably the World Food Program and IFPRI, International Fund for Agricultural Development, to do a rapid impact assessment to generate evidence base that will guide policy formulation and quick interventions, specifically in the agri-food systems and also in the area of nutrition. So this is the second layer of responses that FAO had done. Although what started as a rapid assessment has now transformed into a country-wide assessment of the COVID-19 impact on the general state of food security, nutrition, agri-businesses, value chains, and also small and medium-scale agri-enterprises. So the report is likely to be out in the first week of July, and it would hopefully be used to inform the new policy direction for the government of Nigeria in terms of response to COVID-19, and also it will key into the articulation of the new federal government of Nigeria economic strategy development, which will replace the economic growth and recovery plan. So this is the second set of intervention. Now the third set of intervention that FAO has considered is to build the resilience of particularly vulnerable groups that are affected more seriously by the COVID-19. And in this regard, FAO has identified social protection, specifically linking it to resumption of agricultural activities or agri-value chains activities. What I'm trying to say here is that
Hello? Thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman.
The population subgroups that are abilities even prior to COVID disruptions and in response to for linking social protection programs with agri-based productive livelihood resilience building. So essentially, this is the nexus that we are currently working on, because we are getting to appropriately estimate the targeted communities that are affected the most, and we are programming on that. This is a big effort that involves not only FAO, but many other agencies, including the EU, the UN system, and the World Bank, and also the NASCO, the National Social Security Coordination Office, to expand the National Social Registry, to strengthen the registry and make it more shock responsive and have the universality and the applicability for rapid responses. So this is what we are currently working on. I don't know if my time is off, but in a nutshell.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr.
This has
Suleiman.
been the area of focus since the beginning of the pandemic. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman. Thank you for that. And to wrap up, we have one more question. I'll let it, am I clear? Hello? So we have one more question. I will let everybody on the panel take it, or yeah, I think it's good for everybody. School, churches, and now social media have proven more effective informal business networks for farmers to overcome their supply chains and logistic challenges where banks and government institutions have failed, meaning schools and churches and social media have been proven more effective for information. What alternative approaches are organizations taking to upgrade awareness and help with the disruption of the supply chain obstacles? That is from Zumanto Dizu. Hello?
Well, I think Anna mentioned things as well as I did about working with stakeholders and forming public-private sector dialogues and focus groups and validation meetings using online tools. In some cases, the online tools are very efficient because I've been in a number of meetings this week where to get all those people together physically in the same spot would be tremendously difficult. And we've had webinars now with over 500 people on them. So in terms of schools and churches, one of the things I fully agree with that comment. I think churches and mosques and other places have a tremendous opportunity, those leaders, to get messages across, because it's all about the credibility of the messenger in many cases, and they are certainly local leaders. One of the things we've done, I mentioned briefly, is we're putting together a compendium of where to get low interest money, government intervention funds, grants, other places. We expect to publish that and disseminate that broadly. It'll also be on our social media, FTF_AgInvest. And we're thinking now of translating it into different languages because the word has to get to the rural farmer, the rural women and youth, etc. Another thing we're doing in the similar vein is putting together a guidebook, a PowerPoint set of slides to help SMEs attract investment. And this too could be translated into a number of languages and then given to schools and churches and banks and investment firms and industry associations to get the word out. And that one is specifically focusing on how does an SME prepare and pitch to a group of investors to get money. So those are a couple things, but I fully support the comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're running out of time. I want to use the opportunity to say thank you to everybody for participating, for being here. Thank you to the panelists. And I'll hand it over to Chirnan. Chirnan, are you there with me? Are you with me, Chirnan?
Yeah, Mr. Kennedy.
Hi, Yewande. Thank you so much for your excellent moderation. If you guys could give a round of applause by using the hand signal, that would be fantastic. Not just to her, but to all our wonderful panelists, from Anna, from the EU, Mr. Ayodeji, Adam Safar, good friend, and Michael Clemens, and obviously Mr. Abubakar from FAO. Thank you for joining us. We truly valued your input. Just wanted to once again thank everyone. They have been exceptional in terms of their insights that they have provided. And it's good to see all the work that's been going on, especially with the development agencies and partners like AFEX. And on that note, we want to say thanks for joining. Every single, all the presentations and a video recording will be sent to all our attendees. If you want to learn more about what ACIOE or IFPRI is doing, or the Nigerian American Chamber of Commerce, I advise that you go to visit our websites, and you see our thought leadership, you see some of the work that we have done to try to see how we can push things in the agricultural sector. So we look forward to working with you, your organizations, collectively, and making a stronger Nigeria. Thank you.